Jack Carter used to consider himself a man who had everything under control. His life is a neatly stacked domino of business, marriage, and reputation. Each brick was laid with millimeter precision. But the problem was that it seemed to him that someone had begun to quietly pull them out one by one. Friday evening. Marital home in an exclusive area of Seattle. The living room has dim lighting, and there are 2 glasses of red wine on the glass table, one of which is almost untouched. Lauren sits on the sofa, her long legs crossed seductively, her short black dress emphasizing the curves of her body. Perfect picture. Too perfect. It's like a beautiful set for a play that doesn't go according to script. Jack stands by the fireplace, watching her. She pretends to be busy on the phone, but her gaze betrays tension. Lauren clutches her glass, her fingers tremble slightly, and a barely noticeable but practiced smile appears on her lips. The same smile with which she always tried to hide the lies. He had seen her so many times that he could already read his wife's thoughts like an open book. "What are you thinking about?" Jack takes a sip of whiskey, sitting down in the chair opposite. "Nothing special," she answers a little too quickly. "Just tired after a long day." "Yes," he leans forward a little. "Interesting. You said that today your shift ended at 4. What made you so tired?" She blinks. A split second is enough to notice that she was not expecting this question. "Well, I stopped by Nikki's. We just sat and chatted. Women's conversations." Lauren takes a sip of wine, her tongue just touching the edge of the glass. She unknowingly plays the role of an innocent wife. Jack can barely contain his grin. "Is it true?" He leans back, pausing. "Are you sure you were at Nikki's?" Lauren freezes. Anxiety flashes in her eyes, but she quickly copes with herself. "What, I should have sent you a photo report." She laughs nervously, trying to turn it into a joke. Jack smiles slowly, but his eyes remain cold. He is in no hurry to reveal his cards. For now. "Of course not. It's just weird that Nikki called me today to see how you were doing. She says she hasn't seen you for a long time." Lauren places her glass on the table, a little harsher than necessary. The sound of crystal fills the silence. Jack sees a barely noticeable nervous spasm running down her neck. She tries to pull herself together again. Maybe she just forgot, or confused days. "We met a few days ago, I guess." Jack shrugs, giving her the illusion of a way out. Lauren relaxes, but only for a moment. Jack notices how her gaze slides back to the phone, which lies next to her on the couch. He knows that if he were to pick it up now, he would see messages that are not intended for his eyes. "Maybe I'm missing, maybe I'm waiting, or maybe something more frank." He studies her movements, remembers every little detail. Her breathing became a little faster. She realizes that his words are not just curiosity. This is a hint that should make her nervous. But she tries to hide it. She slowly gets up from the sofa, smoothly walks across the room, pretending to be looking for something in the locker. The back is straight, the shoulders are tense. Her body screams that she is afraid, but with her words she continues to play the game. "Maybe you're just too suspicious," she says without looking at him. "You've always been like this. You see ghosts where there are none." Jack grins. He decides not to reveal his suspicions for now. He wonders how long she will last. There are too many inconsistencies. There are too many little details that a normal person wouldn't notice. But Jack is no ordinary person. He knows when he is being lied to. And now he doesn't just suspect anymore. He knows. But let her think that he remains in the dark. Let him continue playing. Because now in this game, he is the main player. Jack sat in his office, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. The amber liquid slowly rolled along the walls, reflecting the muted light of the table lamp. His gaze was fixed on one point, but in fact he was not looking at the wall in front of him, but into the depths of his own past. The memories rolled in, wave after wave, pulling him back to the day he first saw Lauren. It was 12 years ago, on a summer evening, when the air was warm and the sky the color of faded denim. Jack had just returned from a business trip, tired but happy. A friend persuaded him to go out for a drink just to relax, nothing special. They went to a bar in the city center, a place where people with money and ambitions always gathered. He didn't intend to stay long. Little did he know then that this evening would change his life. She entered the bar like a tsunami suddenly, spectacularly, leaving behind the broken looks of men. Tall, with an exciting figure, long blonde hair flowed over her shoulders in waves. The red dress hugged her body perfectly, highlighting every line. Her smile, a little self-confident, a little playful, instantly attracted attention. Jack noticed her immediately, but did not give in to the first impulse. He watched. I saw how men tried to attract her attention, but she just laughed, allowing herself slight flirtations, as if she was having fun with it. And then she looked at him. It was a short glance, just a second, but there was something special about it. Pure curiosity, challenge, interest. Lauren took a step towards him, and at that moment Jack realized that she was not the kind of woman who was easy to get his hands on. She played, and the rules of the game were hers. "Do you always look at women like that?" she asked, sitting down on the bar stool next to him. Jack smiled, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Only those who deserve attention." She raised an eyebrow, but sparkles danced in her eyes. "And how many of these have you seen today?" "One." She bowed her head slightly, as if gauging his answer, and then laughed, a low, mesmerizing laugh that made his heart skip a beat for a moment. They talked for hours, about travel, about life, about your dreams. Lauren turned out to be not just a beautiful woman, but also smart, with character, and the ability to challenge. She disagreed with him on every issue, but did so with such grace that arguing became fun. By the time the bar began to close, she knew more about him than many of the people he had worked with for years. And he is talking about her. He knew that she studied to be a designer, but never went into the profession, preferring the world of high class and elite acquaintances. She talked about this not with bitterness, but with a slight grin, as if fate did not burden her at all. "So you often persuade women to stay late?" she asked when they went outside. "Not often," he answered honestly, "but I'm ready to stay with you even until the morning." She looked at him, holding her gaze a little longer than necessary. Then she smiled and stepped closer. "Then let's not rush. Things worth doing take time." And then Jack realized he was gone. That evening, at that moment, she became his drug, a desire that could not be ignored. Returning to the present, he gripped the glass a little tighter. How naive he was then. He thought he had met a woman who would make him happy. After that night in the bar, their story developed rapidly, but with sparks that did not give a second of rest. Lauren was never a woman who slowly entered a man's life. She burst into it, leaving marks on the sheets, skin, and mind. Jack found himself in her network, but it was not an ordinary trap, but a whirlpool of passion, challenge, and mysterious attraction. They met on the roofs of skyscrapers to drink wine under the stars, disappeared on weekends without warning, forgetting about phones and business. They chased each other in foreign cities, betting who would be the first to find each other among the chaos of the streets. Lauren was wild as fire, and Jack was the only one who could hold her without getting burned. But there was one moment when he realized that this was not just a novel, but something more. It happened in Tokyo, on the roof of one of the most expensive hotels in the city. They stood barefoot on the edge of the pool, the water reflecting the neon signs, and Lauren, wrapped in his jacket, smiled as if they were the only people in the entire universe. "Let's run away," she said. "We have already escaped. We are in Japan, on the roof, drinking sake. What else do you need?" He grinned. "No, I mean for real. Let's forget about traditions. Let's get married the way we want, without all these boring ceremonies. Are you proposing to me?" He leaned closer, studying her face. "Perhaps," Lauren squinted, "or I'm checking how much you are willing to take risks." The next morning, they exchanged rings right in the garden of an ancient Shinto shrine, without guests, without a dress or tuxedo, only with a warm wind, cherry blossoms, and a monk who blessed their union. It was strange, impulsive, and absolutely perfect. They sealed their vows with a heated kiss, and then, laughing, ran out of the temple, holding each other's hands like two teenagers who had done something crazy. But their wedding was not the only proof of their special connection. Lauren always played by her own rules, and Jack was the only one who could keep up with her. Their honeymoon was not a vacation, it was a race around the world. Diving with sharks in South Africa, skydiving in Dubai, motorcycling along serpentine roads in Italy. They challenged life and each other. Only once did Jack see uncertainty in her eyes. It happened in Paris when they were standing on the balcony of their room with glasses of wine. "Do you think we'll ever settle down?" Lauren looked at him as if thinking about the future for the first time. "Do you want to?" He raised his eyebrows. She took a sip before answering. "Sometimes it seems that if we slow down, everything will lose meaning." "Lauren," Jack took her hand. "The point is not speed. He is in us." Jonathan and Emily's house was the perfect place for such parties, a spacious terrace, panoramic views of the city, cozy seating areas with soft sofas and dim lighting. The music played quietly so as not to drown out the conversations, and the aromas of expensive whiskey, wine, and fine cigars hung in the air. Jack held a glass of bourbon in his hand, slowly plunging into conversation with a couple of business acquaintances. His attention was periodically diverted to Lauren. She was the center of this party. The light black dress emphasized her impeccable form, and her golden curls cascaded over her shoulders as if created to attract glances. Lauren laughed easily, touched the shoulders of her interlocutors in time with the conversations. Her voice sounded warm and lively. She knew how to control attention and did it masterfully. That's when Jack noticed Ryan Holt. Tall, confident, with the impeccable smile of a man who always gets his way. He was the husband of Nikki, Lauren's best friend. But now, it seemed, his interest was not focused on his wife at all. He stood next to Lauren, leaning slightly towards her, his hand almost imperceptibly touching her elbow as he said something. And Lauren, she laughed. The laughter was not forced or polite, it was sincere, ringing. She looked at Ryan a little longer than necessary. There was something in her eyes that made Jack tighten his fingers around his glass. The evening continued, but his mood changed. He knew his wife. Lauren always loved flirting, innocent games in which there was nothing serious. At least that's what he thought before. But something about this evening was different. He watched as Lauren lifted the glass to her lips, as her fingers lingered on the glass, as she tilted her head slightly, listening to Ryan. These little things did not escape his attention. "You look tense," Emily's voice distracted him from his thoughts. She stood nearby, holding a glass of wine and smiling slyly. "Just tired," he replied, taking a sip of bourbon. "Or are you jealous?" Emily glanced towards Lauren and Ryan. Jack grinned. "Whom? Ryan? It's just a game." "Maybe. Or maybe you just don't want to see the obvious." Emily shrugged and walked away, leaving him with his thoughts. Jack continued to watch. Ryan leaned a little closer to Lauren, his fingers lingering on her wrist for a moment before sliding down. The movement was almost imperceptible, but Jack saw it. He felt anger rising within him, but kept a calm expression on his face. Lauren did not remove her hand, and her lips stretched into a lazy smile. The guests continued to have fun. Somewhere in the corner, a group was laughing loudly, discussing the latest football match. Someone was arguing about politics, and someone already looked too drunk to understand what was happening. But for Jack, this evening came down to one picture: Lauren and Ryan, their two light touches, their glances, their invisible connection. The night was gradually coming to an end. The guests were leaving. Some had already had too much alcohol, and others were making plans to meet next week. Lauren approached Jack, her eyes shining from the wine she drank and the atmosphere of the evening. "Well, how did you like the party?" she asked, clinging to him. "Wonderful. You clearly enjoyed Ryan's company." His voice was calm, but everything was boiling inside. She smiled, running her finger along his tie. "You know that I like attention." Her voice was soft, but there was a challenge in it. "I hope you understand that you are playing with fire," he whispered, sliding his fingers along her waist. She didn't answer. She just smiled and squeezed his hand tighter. The night was warm, The air still smelled of whiskey and perfume when Jack and Lauren left Jonathan and Emily's house. Their car was parked at the curb, and as soon as she got in, Lauren was already leaning back in the seat, her legs gracefully crossed, and her fingers lazily running along the hem of her dress. "You were tense today," she said quietly, looking intently at Jack, who started the engine. He glanced at her briefly, definitely, before turning his gaze to the road. Maybe, or maybe I just don't like it when my wife gets too involved with other people's husbands. Lauren chuckled, lightly biting her lower lip as if she was amused by the remark. Her hand slowly slid along the inside of his thigh. "Are you jealous?" Her voice was barely audible, but there was mockery in it. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, his muscles tensing. There was a fire burning inside him, but he knew that anger should not take over. "Not now." "You're playing with fire, Lauren," he muttered, turning his head slightly towards her. She just smiled and removed her hand. The rest of the journey passed in silence, filled with tension. As soon as they parked at the house and walked inside, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Lauren closed the door first, leaning her back against it and casting a defiant look at Jack. He didn't have time to answer. Her lips were already pressed to his lips, hot, demanding, insistent. Her hands slid over his chest, then down to his belt. "If I'm playing with fire," she whispered, running her fingers along his stomach, "maybe you can show me what it means to get burned." Jack grabbed her waist sharply, his fingers closing on her skin, causing goosebumps, and he pressed her against the door. She moaned, arching, her body burning under his touch. "You're driving me crazy," he muttered. His breathing became heavy, hot. "Then take advantage of this, Jack." Her voice trembled, but there was a challenge in it. He picked her up, and her legs immediately wrapped around his waist. Lauren moaned as his fingers slid across her skin, causing her body to arch to meet his movements. Jack carried her into the living room, and they collapsed on the sofa. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, pulling his shirt off. Her lips slid along his neck, leaving light bites. His hands knew her body thoroughly. Their movements were coordinated, instinctive, almost primitive. Lauren threw her head back, her eyes sparkling with excitement, her breathing ragged. He ran his fingers over her lips, making her moan in response. "You are mine," he whispered. "Always," she replied, squeezing his hips. They moved in the same rhythm, their bodies found harmony, a long-studied dance of passion. Their moans filled the room, every movement, every kiss ignited a fire inside that did not go out. As their climax hit them both, Lauren screamed his name, arching her back, and Jack clenched his teeth, feeling their bodies peak together. They collapsed on the sofa, out of breath, covered in sweat, but with happy, satisfied smiles on their lips. For some time, they just lay there, enjoying the silence after the storm. Lauren was the first to break the silence, lazily running her fingers over his chest. "So you were jealous." Her voice was mocking, but there was contentment in her eyes. Jack took a deep breath, rolling over to look into her eyes. "Maybe," he smirked slightly, running his finger over her lower lip. "But you still belong to me." She smiled, pulling him towards her. Always. Jack always took pride in the fact that he knew Lauren better than anyone. He noticed the slightest changes in her behavior and caught the subtle nuances of her mood. They had been together too long for him to not sense when something was wrong. Lauren has changed lately. They were subtle details, but they added up to a picture he couldn't ignore. At first it was little things. She began to spend more time on her phone, rereading messages, smiling at the screen, but noticing his gaze, she immediately turned off the screen or put it aside. Their conversations at dinner became shorter, as if she was answering questions out of inertia, but her thoughts were far away. Jack knew her well enough to know that she wasn't just tired. The most alarming thing happened at night. Their bed was always a place where they could forget about everything, dissolving into each other. But now, when he pulled her towards him, her body seemed cold. She responded to his touch less and less, and even when they made love, he felt that her thoughts were somewhere far away. She no longer looked into his eyes the way she used to. One night, he tried to start a conversation. Lauren lay next to him, Her back turned to him, and her phone was glowing on the nightstand. "Are you okay?" he asked, gently touching her shoulder. "Of course," she answered too quickly, without turning around. "You have become different." He ran his fingers along her back, but she only moved slightly, as if avoiding his touch. She sighed and slowly turned to him. "I'm just tired, Jack. A lot of work, stress. You know how it is." He nodded, although everything inside was clenched. It was a lie, sweet and comfortable, but a lie. He felt it deep down. The next morning, while Lauren was taking a shower, he took her phone. He knew it was wrong, that he shouldn't have done it, but the feeling of anxiety grew inside him. The screen was locked, but it only took him a few seconds to notice the unread messages. One name appeared in his memory like a flash. Ryan. Jack's fingers clenched into a fist. He took a deep breath and returned the phone to its place. Jack couldn't get the name that popped up on Lauren's phone screen out of his head. Ryan. It sat in his mind like a thorn, preventing him from thinking about anything else. He was not a man who acted on impulse, but his patience was running out. There were too many coincidences, too many questions that needed answers. He was waiting for the right moment. All day Lauren behaved as usual. She laughed, chatted on the phone, ordered something from online stores. But when she returned from her girls' date with Nikki, he felt like this had to be the moment. She took off her shoes at the entrance and walked into the living room, throwing off her light cape. "Good evening," he asked calmly, sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey. Lauren nodded, taking her phone out of her purse. She scanned the screen mechanically before putting it down. "Yes, we had a great time. Nikki was talking about some new trends in design. You know how she is. How did you spend your evening?" Jack sipped his whiskey, studying her gaze. He saw a slight tension in her eyes, a barely noticeable wariness. She was hiding something. He felt it. "Lauren, how long have you been so actively communicating with Ryan?" he asked without looking away. She froze for a second, but immediately regained her composure. Her lips twitched in a slight smile. "What? Do you often correspond with him?" he clarified. Lauren frowned, her hand instinctively reaching for the phone, as if she wanted to make sure it was still there, safe. "Jack, what are you talking about? Ryan is Nikki's husband. How can I not communicate with him?" A note of irritation appeared in her voice. "So everything is clear." He leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of steel in it. "Of course," she answered, but now her voice was firmer, almost defensive. He paused, then said, "Then why are you so angry?" Lauren blinked, her fingers clenching into a fist. "Are you angry?" She laughed, but there was no fun in this laughter. "I wasn't angry because of that, but because you, damn it, were going through my phone. Do you understand that this is an invasion of my privacy?" Jack tilted his head, his gaze unchanged. "Personal life. You are my wife, Lauren, and if I see you acting strange, I have the right to ask questions. You have no right to get into my phone." Her voice broke into a scream, and now she stood with her hands on her hips. "This is distrust. This is control. What are you even looking for? Scandal. Do you think I'm cheating on you?" Jack slowly put his glass down on the table. His heart was beating evenly, but everything was boiling inside him. "I want to understand what's going on, Lauren. You have changed. You have become cold and distant, and I want to know why. Maybe because it pisses me off that my husband is spying on me?" Her eyes sparkled with rage, and now she stepped closer. "Maybe because I'm tired of your suspicions." He was silent, but his jaw tensed. Lauren took the phone from the table and squeezed it in her hand. "You know what? I'm not going to make excuses for you for hanging out with Ryan," she blurted out. "He's a friend. We are all friends. And if you can't accept this, then it's your problem, not mine." Jack nodded slowly, watching her. He saw how nervous she was, how her breathing quickened. She defended herself too zealously, too aggressive. He took a step back and smiled coldly, distantly. "Okay, Lauren," he said quietly. "If you have nothing to hide, then I won't ask any more." She squinted, trying to figure out what was behind his words. "That's right," she breathed, then turned around and went into the bedroom, leaving him alone. Jack took the glass and finished the whiskey in one gulp. Jack lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the night. Lauren was nearby, her breathing even, but he knew she was awake. He felt it. In recent weeks, she had become distant, detached, as if her thoughts were somewhere very far away, and he couldn't ignore it. He turned to her, his hand slowly sliding over her bare shoulder. She didn't flinch, but she didn't react either. She just remained motionless. "Lauren," his voice was quiet, almost pleading. "What is happening to us?" She was silent for a long time. The tension in the room was heavy and suffocating. Then she sighed and turned her head towards him. "Nothing, Jack. Just tired." Her words sounded too mechanical, too cold. This was not the woman he had shared his nights with, the woman he had longed for, the woman who had once wanted him just as much. She looked at him, but there was no former heat in her eyes. "I want you," he leaned closer, his lips touching her neck. She didn't pull away. She allowed him to touch her, but her body was motionless, as if it were someone else's. Previously, when he touched her, she arched forward, her breathing quickened, she drowned in him just as he did in her. Now, nothing. He covered her lips with a kiss, slowly, trying to awaken something in her, but she responded mechanically, without a hint of passion. Her fingers slid over his chest, but the movements were empty, as if she was doing it out of duty and not out of desire. "Lauren," he whispered between kisses, but she didn't answer. He continued, hoping that he could awaken her feelings, that he could bring back the woman he loved, but the further he went, the more he realized that she was just allowing this to happen. She let out a soft moan as he entered her, but there was no passion in the sound. It was a mechanical movement, just physical intimacy without emotions, without fire. She lay under him, accepting him but not feeling him. Every movement was harder for him. He tried to find her gaze, tried to see something there, a desire, a responsive need, but she just looked at the ceiling, her hands lay lazily on his back. She didn't cling to him and didn't drown in this moment. She was simply there, but at the same time she was not there. "Damn," he hissed, suddenly slowing down. She finally looked at him, and a ghostly shadow of a smile appeared on her lips. "It's okay, Jack." Her voice was too soft, too submissive. "Just let's finish." Those words hit him harder than any fist. Let's finish. As if it was a duty. It was as if he was someone she simply tolerated. Jack stopped. He felt his anger and pain welling up inside. He didn't want this. I didn't want them to just finish. He got off her and sat on the edge of the bed, covering his face with his hands. His chest heaved with uneven breathing. Lauren sat up too, pulling the sheet over herself. "Jack." Her voice was quiet, but he didn't turn around. "Forget it," he answered dully, getting out of bed and heading to the bathroom. When he closed the door behind him and turned on the water, he clenched his fists. He felt that something in them had completely broken, something that could no longer be undone. Lauren never planned for this. Nikki became her friend naturally, easily, without forcing. They met a couple of years ago at a party and instantly hit it off. Nikki was kind, open, and funny, but most importantly, she had a husband who attracted Lauren from the very first sight. Ryan. Tall, confident, charismatic. A man who knew how to control himself, but there was always a hidden sparkle in his gaze, a hint that something dark, untamed lay beneath the surface. Ever since Lauren met him, she couldn't get him out of her head. He moved confidently, spoke slowly, and his smile was always slightly predatory. She didn't just notice it, she literally caught every detail, every moment when his gaze lingered on her a little longer than on others. At first it was innocent flirting, fleeting glances across the table, light touches that could pass for accidental. Lauren knew how to play. She loved to catch the reaction of men, loved to see how they let their guard down. Nikki didn't notice, she trusted her too much. Lauren smiled at her, told her how much she admired her family, but there were completely different desires in her thoughts. She wanted to try something she probably shouldn't have. The more time they spent together, the stronger the tension became. Lauren felt her heart speed up as Ryan walked by, her body reacting to his voice. She saw that he noticed it too, but still kept his distance. It irritated her and excited her at the same time. Fantasies become reality one evening when the three of them went to a corporate party. Nikki got tired and left early, leaving Lauren and Ryan alone at the bar. They were sitting too close. She could smell him, the faint aroma of expensive whiskey and woody cologne. The atmosphere was right. Dim lights, music in the background, drinks that made their thoughts a little bolder. "You like to play with fire, Lauren," Ryan said as she leaned closer, her lips almost touching his ear. "Only if I know that this fire won't burn me." Her voice was low and playful. He looked at her, and the very expression she was waiting for flashed in his eyes. A mixture of desire and repressed temptation. "We can't," he whispered. "But you want to," she replied, running her nails down his arm. 20 minutes later, they were already in the hotel room. Lauren barely had time to close the door behind her when Ryan abruptly pushed her against the wall. His lips covered hers with greed, which made her understand that he had been restraining himself for too long. "You're damn dangerous, Lauren." His voice was hoarse and low. "And you like it," she smirked before pressing her lips to his again. He tore her dress, not caring about tenderness. She moaned in a mixture of pain and pleasure, her nails digging into his shoulders. His hands slid down, exploring every inch of her body. "Fuck, Lauren," he moaned, pressing his lips to her neck, leaving marks on it. She moaned, arching towards him, her fingers trembling with anticipation as she unbuckled his belt. She wanted him right now, without foreplay, without talking. "Do you know how long I've wanted this?" Her voice trembled with excitement. "You're crazy," he breathed, pressing her to the bed. "Show me, Ryan," she grinned, pushing him down. "Show me how crazy I am." And he showed. Without words, without doubt. He moved roughly, forcefully, holding himself back just enough to keep from losing control completely. Lauren screamed, digging her nails into his back, demanding more, provoking him to become even more violent. Every movement, every moan was wild and unbridled. It was as if they did not exist in the real world, only in this room where the boundaries had long been blurred. He called her dirty words, and she answered him the same. Her body was hot, his hands greedy. They didn't just want each other, they demanded each other. At that moment, she knew they had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. This was not a one-time weakness. It was a fire that could not be put out. When it was all over, they lay panting, covered in sweat and torn sheets. Ryan looked at her, his chest heaving. "We're in shit," he muttered. Lauren laughed, running her fingers over his chest. "No, Ryan. We've just started." After that night, everything changed. Lauren and Ryan couldn't stop anymore. Their first crazy sex in a hotel was not an accident, but the beginning of something much more dangerous. They found new excuses to meet. Dinners with Nikki, random coincidences in cafes, quick, stolen moments in dark alleys. The thirst they had kindled needed feeding, and they gave each other everything they could. Each new date brought even more adrenaline. Lauren felt the excitement not only from Ryan, but also from the game itself, from the danger of being discovered. She sent Nikki messages telling her how much she missed her, and at that moment her legs were spread for her husband. Ryan knew it was wrong, but he couldn't stop. He felt that this affair was tearing him apart from the inside, but as soon as he found himself back in Lauren, common sense disappeared. They became more careful, but not enough. And Jack felt that something was wrong. At first, it was little things. Lauren began to stay late more often, saying that she urgently needed to go somewhere on business. Her phone, which had previously been lying around, was now always nearby, screen down. She began to spend more time in the bathroom, and when she came out, her eyes sparkled, but not from fatigue. Jack noticed the changes, but did not immediately understand their true nature. And then the coincidences began. One evening, he was picking up a car from a service center when he saw her. Lauren stood on the street corner, her long coat wrapped around her, but he knew her too well. This was her special look, the one she wore when she wanted to impress. He wanted to shout at her, but then he saw a second figure. Ryan. He was standing too close. I looked into her eyes for too long. He touched her hand too carefully. Jack didn't show it, he just watched from afar. A picture began to form in his head that he did not like. He knew Ryan as Nikki's husband. They talked and crossed paths at parties. He had never thought about it any differently until now. The next morning, he decided to test his guess. Lauren said she was going into town on business, but her voice was too flat, too carefully chosen. Jack waited until she left and then got into the car and followed. He knew what he was doing. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a necessity. Lauren took a different turn than she promised. She drove through the city, stopping at a small hotel. She went inside and Jack waited. The minutes dragged on endlessly. He was about to leave when he saw Ryan. Damn Ryan. He appeared around the corner of the building, looked around, and then went inside the same way as Lauren. Jack felt something break inside him. He was not an impulsive person. He did not break into the building, did not create a scene. He just sat there, his fingers slowly tightening around the steering wheel, and his thoughts, one after another, turned into a clear, cold picture. Lauren cheats on him. He didn't know the details. He didn't know how long ago it had started. But now he had proof. Jack turned on the engine. His face remained motionless, but the fire was boiling inside him. He didn't yet know what he would do. But one thing was clear. This game has just begun. Now he will no longer be just an observer. Now he will begin to act. Jack was patient, but when he played a long and cruel game. He was going to find out everything. Every meeting, every call, every lie. Lauren had no idea that she was being hunted. Jack sat in his office, drumming his fingers heavily on the wooden tabletop. There was a business card on the table in front of him. Simple, unremarkable, with clear black letters on a white background. Robert Hale, private detective. He found him through friends. A person who is paid not for questions, but for results. And that's exactly what Jack needed now. When the detective entered the office, Jack looked at him carefully. He was of average height, thin, with sharp facial features and predatory eyes. A man who knew how to be invisible, but appeared where he was not expected. "Are you Jack Carter?" His voice was hoarse, as if he smoked a lot. "Yes, sit down," Jack gestured to the chair opposite. Robert sat down, took a notepad out of his pocket, and looked at it. "Do you need proof?" he asked without further ado. "I need everything," Jack spoke evenly, but there was steel in his voice. "I have suspicions, but I need facts." "Undeniable iron." Robert nodded. "Have you found out anything yet?" Jack clenched his jaw, looking at him. "I saw my wife enter the hotel. A few minutes later, Ryan Holt walked in there. I'm not a fool, Robert. I want to know how long this goes on, where they meet, what they do. I want everything." The detective nodded slowly, writing something down on his notepad. "So we already have a lead." "Fine. I'll bug your house, her car, her phone. There are cameras in the living room, bedroom, and, if possible, in that very hotel. I'll also keep an eye on Holt's movements. It will take some time, but the result will be comprehensive." Jack slammed his hand down on the table, causing the detective to look up. "I don't need just guesses and assumptions." His voice broke into a roar. "I need the damn truth. I want to see, hear, know what exactly my wife is doing behind my back. How many times? How long? How deep he is in her. Everything down to the last fucking detail." Robert raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't back down. He was used to this. "Do you want full control?" he clarified. "I want me to have evidence on my hands that she won't have a single chance to get away with. I need recordings, clear pictures, text messages, everything. I want her to know when I show her this crap that the end has come." Jack gritted his teeth. "And I want to see his face when he realizes that he didn't just have sex with someone's wife, but the wife of someone who could destroy his life." The detective chuckled and nodded. "You pay for information, Mr. Carter. I'll get it. But be careful. Sometimes people think they are ready for the truth, and then they receive it and realize that it's not." Jack leaned forward slowly, his gaze icy. "Trust me, Robert. I'm already ready. The only question is whether she is ready. Robert silently wrote something down on the notepad, then stood up, putting it back in his pocket. Then I'll start. In a week, you will have the first results. Jack nodded. He knew that this week would be his longest. When Robert left, he picked up a glass of whiskey, took a sip, and closed his eyes tiredly. Soon he will know everything. And then the real game begins. Jack was sitting in his office. A video was open on the laptop screen in front of him. His fingers clenched into fists, but outwardly he remained motionless, as if carved from stone. Everything was seething inside, but he kept himself under control. The file was handed over by the detective. "Open it when you're ready," Hale said, handing over the flash drive. Is he ready? The hell with it. But he needed to see. Jack pressed play. The hotel number lit up on the screen. The camera is installed perfectly, everything is visible. Lauren in one of his expensive dresses, which he himself gave her. Ryan, his shirt unbuttoned, smiles lazily, leaning on the edge of the bed. "Are you sure he won't suspect anything?" Ryan says with a muffled laugh. "Are you serious?" Lauren grins, kicking off her shoes. He doesn't notice anything at all. All he needs is for the house to be clean and dinner on the table. Jack clenched his jaw, feeling everything boil inside. Another key press, and the video continues. Ryan grabs her by the waist and pulls her sharply towards him. Lauren gasps, laughs, clings to his shoulders. "Fuck," he breathes, pulling her dress off, leaving her in just her underwear. "You always turn me on so fucking much." She smiles, slowly sliding her hand over his chest, then down. "Maybe because with you I want more than just quickly and without emotions." She kneels in front of him, her hands deftly unfastening his belt, and there is not an iota of doubt in her gaze. Jack watches his wife do for another man what she has never done for him. Ryan freezes, his fingers burying themselves in her hair. "Damn, Lauren, your girlfriend is a real log in bed, and you were made for this," he exhales, arching his back. Lauren laughs as she continues her movements, then abruptly pulls away and licks her lips, watching his reaction. "I know, honey. I've wasted myself for too long on someone who doesn't know how to use me the way I need." Jack clenched his fists. The video continued, but he had already seen everything. I heard everything. He watched his wife give herself completely to another, allowing Ryan to do things to her that she had never allowed Jack to do. How she moans, arches, digs her nails into his back. How she suffocates from the pleasure that she never had with her husband. His blood was boiling, his vision was clouded by rage, but he didn't let her take over. Not yet. Jack sat at the table in a small, cozy cafe, crossing his arms over his chest. Nikki sat opposite him, frowning. Her hands were shaking. She clutched the coffee cup as if it could hold her in reality. Her gaze darted, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked confused, but not yet broken. "It's not funny, Jack," she finally managed to say. You must be mistaken." Ryan couldn't. Jack took a deep breath, holding back his anger. He knew that was what she would say. No one wants to believe that the person you love is having sex with your best friend behind your back. "I wish I was wrong, Nikki. But I'm not wrong." His voice was low and cold. "I wouldn't waste my fucking time if I wasn't sure." She shook her head, smiling nervously. "No, this is some kind of mistake. He loves me. He is not capable." "Oh, believe me, he's capable," Jack interrupted her. He reached into his pocket, took out his phone, and opened the video. "Look, and then tell me I'm wrong." Nikki froze. Her face turned pale when she saw the screen. At first, she turned away, pursing her lips, but Jack roughly shoved the phone closer. "Don't look away. You should see this." She slowly turned her gaze to the video. At first, all that was heard was breathing and laughter, and then the moaning began. Bright, loud, and Nikki recognized that voice. The damn voice of her best friend. She looked. She watched as her husband impaled Lauren on himself. The way she arches, the way her nails dig into his shoulders. She watched as Ryan squeezed her hair and whispered dirty words. I listened to what he called her log in bed, and Lauren is the best she's ever been. Nikki covered her mouth with her hand, but tears were already streaming down her cheeks. She was breathing sharply, convulsively. No, she whispered. No. Jack took the phone back, turning off the video. It's true, Nikki. They had sex behind your back. Behind me. For weeks. Maybe for months. And guess what? He leaned closer, his eyes dark and full of icy rage. I'm not going to start a fucking scandal. No, I want more. She sobbed, but looked up. Now there was more than just pain in her eyes. Now there was anger. What do you want? Her voice trembled. I want to destroy them. Break their lives into pieces. Do you understand, Nikki? I don't want them to just repent. I want them to pay. She looked at him for several long seconds, and then her lips trembled. Her hands stopped shaking. What do you suggest? She asked, slowly wiping away her tears. Jack grinned. We will make sure that they expose themselves. We'll make them believe they can get away with it, and then when they least expect it, we'll strike. Let's smear them through the mud so that they will never be able to stand up again. Are you sure we can pull this off? Nikki frowned, her lips trembling from tense breathing. Yes, Jack nodded, his fingers clenching into a fist. I know her weak points, and I know his weaknesses. They are used to thinking that they are in control of the situation, and we will simply quietly take everything from them. Nikki thought about it. She was silent for several moments, as if trying to piece herself together. Then her lips curled into a crooked smile. Do you think I'll just sit and wait? She glanced at the phone that was still lying in front of them. I want to see them destroyed. I want to see Lauren cry and see Ryan lose everything he has. I want him to know that I'm not just a wife to be used and thrown away. Jack nodded. Then we will begin to act. I'm not going to wait for them to make a mistake. We ourselves will create a situation in which they will paint themselves into a corner. And what do you propose? Her voice was firm, but there was a boiling rage inside. I'll start with Lauren. His smile was cold. She's too used to thinking that she can hide her gains. We will make her believe that she is in control of the situation. And then, we'll just pull the ground out from under her feet. Nikki took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. She ran her hand over her face, wiping away the remaining tears, and then nodded. Let's ruin their lives, she said, and an expression appeared on her face that Jack had never seen before. This was a woman who was no longer going to be a victim. Jack smiled. Perfect, warm, immaculate. He ate breakfast with Lauren, chatted about work, kissed her temple before leaving, and sent sweet messages during the day. He was caring, attentive, and loving. The kind of husband every woman dreams of. The kind of husband that Lauren stopped deserving a long time ago. Something has changed with you, she once remarked, handing him a cup of coffee. In what sense? Jack took a sip, carefully studying her reaction. Lauren frowned slightly, as if she didn't understand what was bothering her. I don't know. You're just different. He chuckled and ran his fingers gently over her wrist. Maybe I just want to be closer to you again. His voice was soft, almost pleading. She held her breath for a second, then quickly smiled and covered his hand with hers. I like it, she said, but there was a flash of worry in her eyes. This is exactly what Jack wanted to see. Because while he was the perfect husband, Lauren continued to lie to him. Lauren had never felt such excitement before. Secrets, forbiddenness, hidden glances at dinners with friends, stolen minutes in parking lots. She thought that cheating would bring fear, but instead she liked the risk. I liked the feeling of control. And Ryan. Ryan was as greedy for her as she was for him. You know I can't resist when you look at me like that, he whispered, dragging her into a dark corner between two buildings. Then don't resist. Lauren ran her nails along his neck before pulling him towards her. And he didn't resist. Their kisses were hungry, their hands exploring each other as if they had forgotten what it was like to wait. He pinned her between him and the cold brick wall, his fingers sliding up her leg without hesitation, lifting her skirt up. You're driving me crazy, he breathed, pressing his lips into her skin. Then use me, she breathed, kissing him back. He used it. Rough, fast, without mercy. And it was in these moments that Lauren felt alive. And Jack was waiting for her at home. Calm, caring. The one who greeted her with a smile and a kiss. "How was your day?" he asked at dinner. "Okay," she answered, smiling back at him. And then he took her hand, gently running his fingers over her skin. She felt warm, felt that he was looking at her as if he was falling in love with her again. Lauren felt like a queen. The night was warm, the air saturated with the electricity of their secret. Ryan's car was parked in a back alley, away from prying eyes. The headlights were off, the cabin was in semi-darkness, but the tension inside was off the charts. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, her chest heaving with ragged breathing. Her heart was pounding so hard that it seemed you could hear it. "You're driving me crazy," Ryan whispered hoarsely, leaning closer. His hand slid along her thigh, his fingers greedily buried in the hem of her short dress. Lauren slowly spread her legs, her tongue running over her lower lip as his fingers touched hot, wet skin. "Then don't resist," she breathed, clinging to him. Ryan didn't need an invitation. He grabbed the back of her head, his lips insistently covering hers. The kiss was greedy, wild, full of insatiable desire. Lauren moaned as his tongue found her, as his fingers began to explore her body as if he wanted to learn her every reaction. She tugged at his belt, undoing the buckle with trembling fingers. "You're such a damn provocative," he gasped as she squeezed his already tense flesh with force. "And you love me for it," she grinned, going lower. Ryan leaned back, his fingers threading through her hair as her lips touched his. He groaned, arching in the chair, his breathing became heavy and ragged. "Fuck, Lauren," he moaned. "Does your husband even know who he lost?" She just grinned, looking up at him. "He doesn't care, and I don't care. Now I belong only to you." Her words seemed to set him on fire. He jerked her to her knees and sat her down on top of him, his hands jerking her panties to the side, not even bothering to remove them completely. He entered her sharply, causing her to throw her head back and moan in surprise. "You don't do that for him, right?" he hissed, squeezing her hips. Lauren bit her lip, her nails digging into his shoulders. "Never." "Because you're mine." His voice was rough, animalistic. He moved deeper, making her gasp with each new wave of pleasure. The car creaked slightly, the fogged windows hiding them from the world. Their bodies moved in unison, greedily, mercilessly. Lauren threw her head back, her moans getting louder, her back arching as Ryan pounded deeper into her. "You were made for this," he breathed, burying his face in her neck. "For dirty games." "Only with you," she breathed, feeling her body approaching climax. She exploded, her nails leaving marks on his skin, her body shaking in his arms. Ryan caught up with her a second later, his fingers digging into her waist as he froze, breathing heavily. There was silence in the car for several minutes, interrupted only by their ragged breathing. Lauren smiled, lazily running her finger over his chest. "You a little yes?" He chuckled, fisting her hair. "We're just getting started, baby." Jack sat at the bar, thoughtfully twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. It was approaching midnight, but he was full of energy. Today, he must learn something that will make his plan flawless. Nikki showed up exactly at the appointed hour. She looked tense but determined. There was no more pain in her eyes, only icy anger. "He lied to me again," she said, sitting down on the chair opposite. "Last night, he said that he was late to work, but I found." She fell silent, her hands clenched into fists. Jack leaned forward, his gaze darkening. "What did you find?" She pulled out a small transparent bag from her bag and threw it on the table. There was a used condom inside. "In the glove compartment of his car," she muttered through clenched teeth. "That bastard didn't even bother to clean up the evidence." Jack grinned, holding up the bag with two fingers. "Clueless. Does he think that if he has sex with my wife, he is invulnerable? I was wrong." He squeezed the bag in his fist. "At least Lauren cares about the conspiracy, but your man is just an animal who doesn't care about the consequences." Nikki exhaled heavily, her lips trembling. He thinks I'm stupid, Jack. He thinks that I will sit and endure, close my eyes. But you know what? Her voice became harsh, almost threatening. He was wrong. Jack nodded. That's why we'll break it. Let's start from the most painful place. Does Ryan have debts? Problems? Nikki grinned, her eyes flashing with gloating. What other ones? He's up to his neck in shit. He spends more than he earns, bets on sports, and recently some guys called me and asked about him. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but now. Debts to whom? Jack narrowed his eyes. People who are not joked with. Bandits, bookmakers. I heard him talking on the phone. They gave him time. If he doesn't give the money back, he's screwed. Jack thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. This can be used. Ryan is not as tough as he makes himself out to be. When his life starts to fall apart, he will panic. We will make sure that he has no choice. Nikki clenched her teeth. He will beg us to leave him alone. No, Nikki, Jack looked up at her. He will beg Lauren because his real weakness is not just money. He thinks that he is in love with her, that she is his salvation. When he realizes that he has lost everything, he will clutch at her like a drowning man at a straw. Nikki clenched her fists, her eyes flashing with anger. This easily accessible girl, this creature. She hissed, her voice trembling with anger. I trusted her. She was my friend. She came to my house, sat at my table, knew everything about me, and at the same time spread her legs for my husband. What the hell? She slammed her fist onto the table, causing the glass to bounce slightly. I thought she was my person, Nikki continued, her voice breaking. And she's just a cheap bastard who couldn't resist taking from someone else. I'm ready to tear her to pieces. Jack grinned, took the glass, and took a sip of whiskey. Don't rush. We'll make it beautiful. I don't want them to just panic. I want them to suffer. Nikki took a deep breath, her gaze hardening. She ran her hand over her face, wiping away the remaining tears, and then nodded. Let's ruin their lives, she said, and an expression appeared on her face that Jack had never seen before. This was a woman who was no longer going to be a victim. Lauren stood in front of the bathroom mirror, nervously stroking the skin on her neck. She could not get rid of the strange feeling of anxiety that had settled in her in recent days. Something has changed. Something's wrong. Everything was easy before. Adrenaline from secret meetings with Ryan, his hands on her body, his hot whispers, his confidence. It gave her a feeling of power. But now she was starting to notice little things that made her doubt. Jack has changed. He didn't ask any more questions, no longer tried to find out where she was or with whom. He just smiled. Too sincere, too calm. He was more attentive than usual, saying compliments that he hadn't said in years. And this scared her more than if he had thrown a scandal. She jumped when her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Message from an unknown number. Are you sure your husband doesn't know anything? Lauren's eyes widened. She felt everything inside her tighten. Damn. She whispered, quickly looking around, as if she was afraid that Jack was standing outside the door. She grabbed the phone, fingers trembling as she tried to figure out who could have written this. Was this a joke? Did someone suspect something? Or Jack? She quickly dialed Ryan's number. Lauren? His voice was relaxed, but she immediately detected notes of wariness in it. We need to meet. Right now, she brooked no argument. 15 minutes later, she was sitting in Ryan's car in a deserted parking lot. Her arms were crossed over her chest, her nails tapping against her skin. Show me, Ryan demanded. She silently handed him the phone, and he frowned, skimming the message. Shit, he muttered, handing the device back to her. This is some kind of bluff. Bluff? What if not? Lauren flashed her eyes at him. If Jack knows. What if he understood something and is now playing with me? He's different, Ryan. He's acting too calm. This is not normal. Ryan sighed, pulling her wrist, forcing her to look into his eyes. Lauren, listen to me. If he knew, do you think he would just sit there and smile? Men don't do that. He would have already caused a scene. He wouldn't live with you anymore. Ryan grinned. he would have already filed for divorce and grabbed everything he could from you. Lauren bit her lip, her breath hitching. What if he's waiting for the moment to strike? Maybe he's collecting evidence. Maybe. Baby, stop. Ryan leaned toward her, his hand squeezing her thigh. It's just paranoia. You're too excited. We just need to be careful. But this does not mean that we have been exposed. Lauren took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. You are sure? Absolutely. His fingers slid along her inner thigh. Stop worrying about it. Think about what's important. She closed her eyes, feeling the anxiety recede, replaced by a familiar heat. Jack watched Lauren. He saw how nervous she was, how her fingers trembled as she poured wine into a glass at dinner. I saw how she avoided his gaze, how she tried her best to play the role of a loving wife, but her falsehood was too obvious. And this gave him pleasure. Are you okay, honey? He asked, smiling. She looked up at him sharply and nodded too quickly. Yes, sure. I'm just tired. Tired? Jack slowly put down his glass. I wonder why. From household chores or something else? Lauren tensed, but immediately put on a smile. From work, of course. He studied her like a predator playing with its prey. You're so tense. Maybe I should help you relax. She froze. He saw doubt in her eyes, uncertainty. She felt that something had changed in him, but could not understand what it was. And it was wonderful. Once they were in the bedroom, Jack wasn't gentle. He wasn't going to be. He sharply turned her towards him, roughly pulled her by the hair, and squeezed her waist. You are my wife, right? His voice was low, threatening. Why, yes. She breathed out, her hands involuntarily falling on his chest. Then behave like a wife, he hissed, covering her lips with a hard, demanding kiss. She gasped, but didn't pull away. He felt her give in slightly, but it wasn't desire, it was fear. Jack knew that at that moment she was not thinking about him, but about something else. About something that haunted her. This only inflamed him. He tore her robe off and threw it on the floor. Her body was still the same as he remembered, but now it seemed alien, dirty. Jack took a condom from the nightstand and tore the packaging with his teeth, not taking his eyes off her. Lauren looked at him with wide eyes, her chest heaving with intense breathing. You've never before. She began, but he interrupted her by grabbing her chin. I just want to be careful. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. The world is full of infection, isn't it? She shuddered. Her eyes filled with tension, but she didn't say anything. Jack smiled. He turned her around and forced her to lean on the bed, one hand squeezing her wrist, the other breaking the boundaries between them. He wasn't gentle. He moved roughly, deeply, mercilessly. Each of his thrusts was not only physical, it was psychological. Lauren moaned, but there was no pleasure in the sound. This was something different. What, honey? Jack leaned towards her ear, roughly grabbing her hair. They didn't do it to you so harshly. She sobbed, clutching the sheets. Jack grinned. You like dirty games, right? So, honey, now I'm playing. He sped up, feeling her body tremble beneath him. This was not pleasure, it was power. Full control. He made her feel, feeling insignificant, tarnished. He wanted her mind to be filled with only him at that moment. Only his hand on her throat, only his breath, only his voice, which whispered dirty, cruel words into her ear. When he finally stopped, he slowly pulled away, not caring about her condition. He took off the condom, tied it in a knot, and threw it in the trash. Lauren lay on the bed, her body trembling, her breathing ragged. Jack looked down at her. You should take a shower, he said, pulling on his trousers. You're too tense. She sobbed, but didn't say a word. She just curled up into a ball, huddled under the sheet. Jack smiled. Nikki was sitting in her car parked in front of the building where Ryan worked. She nervously tapped her nails on the steering wheel, but there was a cold fire in her eyes. Today, she will strike first. She took out her phone, opened her email, and attached files to a new letter. All the evidence of his money fraud, false reports, kickbacks. Everything she had accumulated over the years while she trusted him, while I considered him my own. Recipient, Financial Investigations Unit subject, anonymous report of financial fraud at Holt's company. She typed a short message. Attached are documents confirming Ryan Holt's tax violations. He laundered money through fictitious transactions. I'm sure the audit will show even more. She pressed send and exhaled. Part of her expected to feel guilty. But instead, there was only a strange, acute euphoria. Adrenaline rose, taking over her completely. She knew it was just the first step, but it was damn sweet. Now all that remains is to make sure his boss finds out about his sins. She pulled out a second phone, the one Jack had helped her buy. It didn't contain any of her personal information. Nikki went into an anonymous chat and sent a message to the right person. Mr. Devlin, I recommend paying attention to your employee Ryan Holt. He keeps double-entry bookkeeping. Perhaps the tax authorities are already interested. She sent the message and clenched her fists. Devlin was more than just a boss. He was a man who hated traitors, and Ryan was just like that. The next day, Ryan's office was buzzing like a disturbed hive. Fuck, did you hear? The tax office has arrived, one of the employees whispered. Did Holt hit it big? The other grinned. Ryan stormed into the office with wild eyes. His phone was already ringing with calls. He glanced at his colleagues, whose gazes instantly dissipated, but he knew they had already heard everything. What the hell? He barked, pushing open the door to his office. He didn't notice how one of his colleagues grinned at his back. Holt, the boss is calling for you, the secretary said without looking up. Ryan swallowed nervously. He opened the door to Devlin's office and broke out in a cold sweat. His boss was sitting at the table with a folder of documents in front of him. Devlin had never looked so cold. Sit down, he said without looking up. Ryan sat up, his hands sweating. It's a mistake, boss. I swear that. Shut up, Devlin interrupted, throwing several printouts on the table. What the hell is this? Ryan took one look and turned pale. These were reports. Fake deals. Transfers of money to unknown accounts. His own signatures were on the documents. I can explain. Devlin rose from the table and slowly approached him. I don't care about your explanations, Holt. I want to know who snitched. Ryan swallowed. He had no idea. Someone dug up all this information. Someone started this hellish mechanism. He clenched his fists, his breathing ragged. He was trapped. Somewhere on the other side of town, Nikki was opening a bottle of wine, smiling at her victory. She sat on the windowsill, lazily twirling the glass in her hands. The screen on the phone lit up. Message sent. Documents received. She chuckled. 1-0 Ryan, she whispered, taking the first sip. And that was just the first blow. Ryan sat in his office, looking at the monitor screen where his losses were displayed in red numbers. My heart felt lousy. Yesterday, everything went according to plan, but today he seemed to be in free fall. Something was definitely going wrong, but where did the first blow come from? The tax authorities came first. A formal check, they said. The usual procedure. But Ryan knew that such visits were not accidental. The bank then froze part of his accounts due to suspicious transactions. His accountant, pale and sweaty, tried to explain that there had been several strange payments this month that were now raising questions for the financial controller. And then the worst began. Clients began to cancel transactions. Bosses avoided his calls. Even his business partner, Tom, whom he considered a friend, suddenly stopped responding. What the hell? Ryan threw the phone on the table, clutching his head. What the hell is going on? The next day, the situation got even worse. Ryan, we have a problem, his lawyer said, looking into the office. You won't tell me anything new, he snapped. What now? Our creditors demand payment immediately. One of them hired auditors, and now they are rummaging through all your transactions. We don't have enough liquidity to plug the holes. This is impossible, muttered Ryan, but he himself knew that this was reality. His business was collapsing, and he did not understand who started this hell. Jack sat in his office, sipping whiskey and watching his laptop screen. The cameras installed in his house provided a crystal-clear image of what was happening in the living room. He knew that this moment would come sooner or later, but seeing it live, it was different. Lauren stood at the door, looking around nervously, and then quickly let Ryan inside. He stepped into the house, closing the door behind him, and immediately pulled her towards him, his hand sliding down, squeezing her thigh. Lauren gasped quietly, but didn't push him away. "Are you sure he won't come back?" Ryan whispered. His lips were already touching her neck. "He's busy today," she answered, her voice trembling not from fear, but from excitement. "He has a meeting. He doesn't even know I'm here." Jack chuckled as he took another sip of his whiskey. Oh, he knew. He knew everything. Ryan leaned closer, his breath hot against her skin. "You're so crazy. Bring me right here? Adrenaline rush, right?" Lauren moaned as his fingers slid up her leg. "I can't stop." Her hands were already unbuttoning his shirt, tearing it off his shoulders. "I like risk. You know that if he finds out." Ryan didn't finish. His hands sharply squeezed her waist, pressing her to him. "He won't know," Lauren breathed before capturing his lips with a greedy kiss. Jack watched his wife kiss another man in their house, in his home, in the room where he once held her in his arms, where they laughed, where they shared dreams. Now she stood in front of him on the screen, half naked, with her hair scattered over her shoulders, allowing this bastard to touch her. She threw her leg over him as Ryan pushed her against the wall. His hands explored her body without hesitation, and she only pushed him to do more. "Let's do it right here," he whispered, tearing off her underwear. "On your couch." Lauren moaned, arching forward. "Fuck, this is so crazy," she whispered, her fingers already unbuckling his belt. "You love it, don't you?" Ryan grinned, pushing her onto the couch. He loomed over her, his hands knew no bounds, his breathing became heavier and his movements more insistent. Lauren arched under him, her lips parted, her eyes clouded with passion. Jack didn't look away. He didn't allow himself to blink. He had to see everything, should have remembered every detail. He watched as Ryan grabbed her roughly, as Lauren lost control, as their bodies moved in unison. I heard her moaning, calling his name, begging him not to stop. She had sex with her lover in her husband's house, and she thought that her husband knew nothing. He could stop them right now, could have burst into the living room and destroyed them with one blow. But that would be too easy, too corny. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He will wait until they feel completely safe, and then he will crush them both. Ryan was sitting in his car. His phone lay on the passenger seat, the screen lit up with messages, one after another. "You screwed up, Holt. Where's the money? The deadline is up. You have 48 hours. If you don't figure it out, we'll figure it out ourselves." My heart was pounding so hard that it seemed like it was about to burst out of my chest. These weren't just collectors. These were the people he had spent his entire life trying to avoid. People from whom they did not borrow for no reason. Someone ratted him out. But who? Jack leaned back in his chair, watching the screens. He saw Ryan gritting his teeth, tapping the steering wheel nervously, checking his phone over and over again, as if hoping the messages would disappear on their own. "Come on, bitch, start panicking," Jack muttered, sipping his whiskey. Nikki did her part. She leaked information to the right people, and now the chain of destruction began to unfold. But that was not all. Jack opened the laptop and launched the program. A couple of seconds later, another message appeared on Ryan's phone. "We know it's not all your fault. You have a rat." Ryan froze. The veins in his neck bulged as he read the message. He didn't even immediately realize that he was holding his breath. Rat? Who? He began to frantically replay the latest events in his head. Who could have leaked it? Who could know about the money, about the deals, about the bandits? My head started spinning. Lauren sat on the bed, looking in the mirror. She had a feeling that everything was not going as it should. Jack was acting strange. He was too attentive, too gentle, too patient. He couldn't help but notice that she had become nervous. Ryan has changed too. He became irritable and lost his temper easily. Something was gnawing at him from the inside. And now he burst into her house, slamming the door behind him so hard that her heart jumped. "Ryan," she said warily, but he was already walking towards her, his eyes burning with anger. "I need to know one thing." His voice was low, threatening. "Did you say anything to anyone?" Lauren blinked. "What are you talking about?" Ryan moved closer, squeezing her shoulders so hard she winced. "Don't lie to me, damn it. Someone ratted me out. And if it was you, I swear." "Ryan," she broke out, looking at him with horror. "Are you crazy?" "Of course not. Why do you even think that?" He looked at her for a few seconds, then abruptly turned away, clutching his hair with his hands. "Everything is falling apart, Lauren, you know? All. I don't know who is doing this, but someone is setting me up." She swallowed, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had never seen him like this before. "Ryan," she said carefully, "we'll figure it out, okay? Maybe you're just." He turned around sharply. I'm not making this up," he growled, punching the wall. "Damn it, Lauren, if you know something, if you told someone something, tell me now." She took a step back, her lips trembling. I, I don't know anything." Ryan clenched his jaw, looking at her from under his brows. Something inside him told him that she was telling the truth, or she was simply too good an actress. But now he could no longer trust anyone. Lauren glanced at Ryan as he abruptly turned off the road and into a dark parking lot behind an abandoned warehouse. The rain drummed lightly on the roof of the car, creating a dull rhythm, but inside the car the air was tense, saturated with adrenaline and anger. "Ryan, what are you doing?" Her voice was trembling, but not from fear, from excitement. She saw how he was on edge, how his fingers clenched on the steering wheel, how his jaw tensed. "Shut up," he barked, turning off the headlights. "Just shut up." Lauren took a slow breath, her stomach churning at the abruptness. Damn, he was furious. Tense, angry, ready to explode. But that's exactly what turned her on. This chaos, it was a fury that he could barely contain. She reached for him, her fingers sliding along his thigh, up his inner thigh. "You're on the edge," she whispered, sliding her lips to his ear. Ryan rushed towards her, roughly pulling her by the back of her head. His lips pressed against hers with force, with greed, with a hunger that he could no longer contain. He bit into her, grazed her lower lip with his teeth, squeezed her thighs so hard that he was sure to leave marks. "You're driving me crazy," he breathed, his voice low, almost a growl. "Damn rubbish. Do you even understand what you're doing to me?" Her breathing hitched as he yanked her around, forcing her to kneel on the seat. "Then don't resist," she breathed, biting his bottom lip. He didn't resist. Ryan lifted her skirt roughly, his fingers digging into her skin, hot, insistent, proprietary. Lauren gasped as he suddenly spread her legs, his hand sliding between her thighs. "You're already horny," he chuckled, his fingers moving deeper. "Damn, you like it, huh? Do you like having sex with a guy who has trouble on his tail?" "I like it when you're angry," she admitted, biting her lip as his fingers worked inside her. "When you can't control yourself." He cursed, jerking his belt unfastened. "Spread your legs wider," he commanded, his voice saturated with irritation, anger, but also desire. Lauren obeyed, her body trembling with anticipation. He entered her sharply, without warning, causing her to scream and dig her nails into his shoulders. "Quiet," he hissed, pressing deeper. "You don't want anyone to hear us, do you?" Lauren arched forward, her breathing turned into hoarse, ragged moans. The car creaked, its windows fogged up, creating an invisible barrier between their world and the rest of reality. At that moment, nothing existed except his strong hands on her waist, his lips on her neck, his movements sharp, hard, desperate. Ryan had sex with her as if he was trying to forget everything. About debts, about problems, about fear. And Lauren was lost in the chaos. She adored this. This wild, uncontrollable sex, this adrenaline. She gasped as he squeezed her neck, his dark eyes boring into hers as he whispered through his teeth. "You are only mine, do you hear? Only mine." She couldn't answer. She was too busy with pleasure that consumed her entirely. Loud music, dim lights, the hum of voices, the club was crowded. Lauren felt a wave of excitement, adrenaline, recklessness. She no longer thought about the consequences. All that mattered was he. Ryan. His gaze burned right through her. Their bodies haven't touched yet, but she's already felt his touch. "You're crazy," he chuckled as she slid closer to him, her breasts almost touching his torso. "Isn't it enough for you?" "It's never enough for me." Her voice was low, saturated with promise. He pulled her by the wrist, his fingers sliding along the inside of her palm. Electricity ran through her body. "You're playing with fire." "Then set me on fire." She bit her lip, her eyes sparkling with desire. They couldn't wait. They didn't want to. They needed each other right now. Ryan grabbed her tightly around the waist and pulled her through the crowd towards the back rooms. They slipped into a narrow corridor beyond which were toilets and service areas. "This way," he jerked open the door to the technical room. The smell of metal shelves, locked cabinets, and dusty air filled the space, but they didn't care. As soon as the door slammed behind them, he pushed her against the wall. "You're driving me crazy." His lips moved insistently along her neck while his hands unzipped her dress. "Do you even understand? How dangerous are you?" Lauren arched, her breathing becoming ragged. "And what are you going to do about it?" Her fingers were already tearing the buttons of his shirt. Ryan didn't answer. He leaned towards her, his lips covering hers in a greedy, insatiable kiss. His hands walked over her body, exploring every curve. She moaned as his fingers greedily squeezed her breasts. "Damn, Lauren." He was breathing heavily, his lips crossing hers. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her legs sliding up his sides, clinging to him. "I want it," she whispered. "I want you to take me here and now." He didn't keep her waiting. A moment and her dress was pulled up to her hips. His fingers ran along her inner thigh. She was already ready for him. Her breath hitched as he pressed himself against her, his arms holding her firmly in place. "You're mine," he growled before, with one brutal movement, entering it. Lauren screamed, digging her nails into his back. God, she wanted this. I wanted it so much that I lost my mind. His thrusts were rough, merciless, greedy. He had sex with her as if he was trying to leave his mark on her, as if he wanted her too. I remembered this moment forever. "Do you like it?" he whispered in her ear, his breath burning her skin. She could only nod as the words caught in her throat. "Tell me," he demanded, pounding into her harder. "Yes," her voice was ragged and hoarse. "Do you want someone to come in?" His tone became even darker, dirty. "Do you want someone to see you having sex like the last prostitute?" Her body shook at his words. She really felt like someone could come in at any moment. This only turned her on even more. "Fuck," Ryan hissed as her inner muscles clenched around him. "You really are a little pervert, aren't you?" Lauren scratched at his shoulders, her body completely submitting to his movement, his control. The world around me disappeared. There was only him. Only his heat, his lips, his merciless movements. She screamed as he leaned in, his teeth digging into her skin, leaving a mark. He wanted to mark her. "Ryan," her voice trembled. She was approaching. "Come on, baby." He picked up the pace, harder, deeper. And when the wave of pleasure hit her, Lauren couldn't help but scream. Ryan pressed his hand to her lips, his body shaking with hers. "Quiet," he growled, pounding into her to the very end. They froze, breathing heavily, their bodies trembling with residual pleasure. A few seconds, and she began to come to her senses. "Damn." She breathed out hoarsely, looking at him. It was crazy. Ryan smirked, leaning his lips towards hers. "And you love this." The crack of shattered glass echoed in the silence of the office. The fragments of the phone, which a second ago was still lying in Ryan's hands, now scattered on the floor. His breathing was heavy, his chest was burning, as if he had just run a marathon. But it was not adrenaline, not fatigue. It was rage. Pure, unbridled, tearing him apart from the inside. Just a few minutes ago, he was just sitting, staring at the monitor, desperately trying to figure out the problems that were pouring down on him. Finances, business, creditors, all this was already bad enough. But he even introduced me, and I couldn't let it get worse. And then there was the sound of a new message. Anonymous sender. He usually didn't open such messages. But now, with this level of stress, his hand automatically reached for the phone. One click and his world collapsed. A video appeared on the screen. He pressed play. The image loaded, and before it appeared Lauren, nude, scattered hair, half-open mouth, clouded eyes are pleasures. Only she wasn't alone. A man held her by the waist, his lips slid over her skin, his hands greedily explored her body. Their movements were sharp, hungry, crazy. Ryan, I haven't seen her like this. Not with him. But he couldn't see it, because this never happened. Jack and Nikki created this video. Clear frames, skillfully processed photographs. It was all masterful Photoshop. They spent hours selecting the right pieces, putting on faces, changing lighting, adjusting details. They knew Ryan wouldn't hesitate. He will see and will believe. Because he wanted to believe it. Crap. He breathed, barely aware of the sound of his own voice. The video was followed by photographs. Lauren, arched under this bastard. Lauren, biting her lip, hands in his hair. Lauren is on her knees. Ryan felt his chest tighten. To him, there wasn't enough air. What the fuck? He squeezed the phone in his hand so tightly that the plastic cracked before he threw him into the wall. Damn woman of easy virtue. He exhaled, breathing heavily. Lauren was stopped at a traffic light when her phone vibrated. She automatically looked at the screen Ryan. She smiled, although there was anxiety inside. He was tense after the recent events. Too much tension. She swiped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. "Hi, darling." Her smile disappeared when she heard his voice. "Are you taking me for a fool?" He barked so loudly that she had to move the phone away from her ear. "Damn, who did you sleep with?" Lauren frowned in confusion. My heart skipped a beat. What? What are you talking about? She forced herself to laugh, but there was already panic in her voice. "Don't play with me." He literally growled. "They sent me proof. Lauren, photo, video. You're having sex with some bastard." She froze. "Ryan." "No, it's not me." Her fingers convulsively squeezed the steering wheel. This is fake. I would never." "Shut up." His voice became icy. "I saw everything. You didn't even try to hide it." Her breathing hitched. "What's happening? Who did it? How is this even possible?" "Ryan, you have to believe me." She almost screamed. "I don't know who sent this. I don't know what kind of man this is. I don't care." His voice was filled with hatred. "We're done with you." Horns. Lauren stared at the phone, her hands shaking, her vision blurry. She understood that she had just lost. The bar was half empty, filled only with dim lights and the smell of alcohol. In the corner, at a table hidden from prying eyes, sat Jack and Nikki. She looked flawless, long, perfectly styled dark hair cascaded over her shoulders. The deep neckline of her dress emphasized her impeccable figure. A thin gold chain glittered around her neck, and a lazy, almost mocking smile played on her lips. Jack looked at her, finding himself wondering how Ryan could appreciate it. How can you be so blind? He had this woman beautiful, smart, devoted, ready to do anything for him. And he chose to play dirty with Lauren, who isn't even worth Nikki's shadow. Irony of fate? Maybe. But now he was next to her, and he fucking loved it. Their gazes crossed, tension was in the air, and the ice in the glasses slowly melted. "Did you see his face?" Nikki chuckled, licking her lips as she took a sip of whiskey. He was ready to kill. "Honestly, I didn't even expect him to lose it so fast." A wonderful sight. Jack bowed his head, lazily twirling the glass between his fingers. He saw all. Every emotion, every tremor in Ryan's voice, every flare of anger that boiled inside him, threatening to turn into a destructive hurricane. "You bet," he nodded. He didn't even doubt it. "We did everything perfectly." Nikki slid her tongue across her lips, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She enjoyed this moment as much as he did. The only difference is that for her it was payback, and for him it was a cold-blooded calculation. And what next? Her voice became low, slightly hoarse. "You're not going to stop there, are you?" Jack chuckled, leaning a little closer. Tension hung between them. The dull hum of music in the bar receded, leaving only two of them. "Of course not." His voice was quiet but firm. "I want them to destroy themselves." She bit her lip and leaned forward, almost touching his lips. "Tell me." Jack took one last sip of his whiskey and set the glass down, watching with a grin as Nikki studied his face. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, hidden excitement. He knew that she admired them. His methods, his cold, ruthless strategy. Lauren is already panicking. Her life is falling apart. But now we need to make sure that Ryan loses control. I'll give him evidence that Lauren had another lover. Let him doubt it. Let's go crazy. "This is cruel," Nikki whispered, sliding her fingers along his wrist, then slowly raising her hand higher, her nails skimming softly along his forearm. "This is just the beginning." His voice became lower, deeper. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled slowly, leaning closer. "I want to see how you do it." Jack didn't answer. He simply grabbed the back of her head and pulled her closer. Their lips met in a rough, greedy kiss. It wasn't affection. It was a famine. Adrenaline, excitement, revenge, everything was mixed in this moment. Nikki moaned, pushing into him, her fingers gripping his shirt as he spun her around, pressing her against the wall in the dark corner of the bar. "Are you excited by revenge?" His lips slid along her neck, leaving a hot trail when he bit the skin, forcing her to arch towards her. "And you?" She lifted his t-shirt, her nails leaving red marks on his back. "You love it when everything goes well according to your script, yes?" "Fuck, Nikki." His voice cracked as she ran her tongue along his collarbone, fingers tracing the waistband of his pants. He grabbed her hips, lifting her up, forcing her to throw her legs over his waist. Their breathing became intermittent, their movements became sharp and hungry. They were too far to stop. The air in the bar was too heavy, too hot. Their looks already spoke more than words. When Nikki licked her lips and tugged at his hand, Jack didn't even think twice about it. A minute later, they were in his car. The rain drummed on the roof, drops flowed down the glass, but inside it was stuffy, hot. The tension electrified the air to the limit. She sat cross-legged in the passenger seat, her chest heaving with rapid breathing. Dark hair was disheveled, eyes sparkled with greed. Her dress rode up above her knee, and Jack involuntarily caught his gaze on her smooth, slender legs. "Are you sure you want this?" she whispered, her fingers already unbuttoning the top buttons of his shirt. "After what you did in the bar?" Jack chuckled, his hand tightening on her thigh. "Like I have a choice." She didn't let him finish his sentence, covering his lips with a kiss. It wasn't a soft, romantic kiss. It was hungry, greedy, devouring each other. He pulled her towards him, and she easily threw her leg over his knee, moving towards him in the seat. The fabric of her dress rode up, exposing the skin of her thigh. Jack felt his own body tensed from this spectacle. "Are you angry?" Her lips left a wet mark on his neck. "Or does it just turn you on?" "This is a fucking turn on," he growled, running his hand through her hair. His hands slid under her dress, squeezing her buttocks, forcing her to arch towards him. She moaned into his lips, digging her nails into his shoulders. "Fuck, Nikki." He groaned as she began to move. "You wanted to know if I'm really a log in bed?" Her voice was low, teasing as she ran her tongue along his neck. Jack grinned, his fingers digging into her waist. "If that's the case, then. Damn, your husband needed to get checked out by a doctor." Jack couldn't believe her husband called her a log. She moved, wriggled, squeezed him so hard that it took his breath away. She was skilled, sensual, full of passion. He leaned towards her ear, his breath burning her skin. "Remind me what he called you." He hissed, pounding into her again. "God," her voice trembled. He said I was boring." Jack grinned and bit her neck. He was an idiot. He was moving harder, deeper, enjoying her moans, her trembling, her complete submission to this moment. The car windows were fogged up, the air inside was heated to the limit. As she moaned louder, his hand clamped over her mouth. "Quiet, baby. Or do you want to be heard?" His voice was saturated with teasing cruelty. They were simply silent for a few seconds, coming to their senses. Nikki then grinned, turning her head towards him. "Well, who's here?" "Log." He ran his hand along her back, feeling the heat of her skin, her breathing, her pulse. One thought was spinning in my head, what an idiot her husband was. "I think I have a new favorite night in the car," he chuckled, running his fingers along her thigh. She laughed, leaning back against his chest. The country house rose among a dense forest, immersed in the golden reflections of the evening sun. A spacious veranda, high windows overlooking a picturesque lake, and silence broken only by the cries of birds. The perfect place for a perfect weekend. Jack stood at the bar, holding a glass of whiskey in his hands. His gaze slid across the living room, where all the invitees had already gathered. Lauren, Ryan, Nikki. Everything is here. Lauren looked tense. She had been on pins and needles these past few days. Too many questions, too many coincidences, too many unpleasant conversations with Ryan, who had finally lost his temper after receiving compromising videos. Now there was silence between them, but Lauren felt that something was not so. Ryan drank faster than everyone else. His face was hard and his eyes darted, as if he was looking for a threat but could not find it. He hasn't understood yet where he was lured. And Nikki. Nikki looked calm and relaxed. She was sitting on the sofa, stretched out with a glass of wine, her long legs crossed. She knew what would happen next. Jack chuckled as he took a small sip. "Well, friends," he said, attracting attention to himself. "Welcome to my country house. I thought it wouldn't hurt for all of us to take a little rest and let off some steam. Unwind." Lauren looked up at him, her fingers gripping her glass a little tighter. "An unexpected invitation," she said with a slight, forced smile. "Especially considering, well, we haven't seen each other for a while." Friends shouldn't get lost, right? Jack looked at Ryan, who was taking a sip from his glass, clearly annoyed to be here. "Friends," muttered Ryan, shaking his head. "Certainly." Nikki grinned and took another sip of wine as she watched. Jack put the glass on the table and took a few steps to the center of the room. "I thought we should all switch," he continued. His voice was measured, calm, but there was a hidden subtext in it. "We are too fixated on problems, on the city, on money. Don't you just want rest?" Lauren gave him a quick glance, then turned it to Ryan, who was clearly restrained with anger. "The evening is just beginning," Jack added, filling his glass. "Relax. There are a lot of interesting things ahead. Fishermen say that the most important thing in fishing is patience. Sitting in silence for hours, waiting for the victim to make a mistake, succumb to instinct, grab the bait, and no longer be able to escape. And of course, if you know where to look, it's only a matter of time." Jack knew exactly where to look. He glanced at Ryan, who was standing at the edge of the water, holding a fishing rod. He was tense, too tense. His shoulders were tightly drawn together, and his jaw periodically trembled as he mechanically grinded irritated thoughts with his teeth. "You're lucky," Jack broke the silence, watching the motionless surface of the water. "Fish bite only from those who know how to wait. Well, or those who know where to throw the bait." Ryan jerked his rod sharply, as if trying to catch a non-existent bite. His fingers tightened on the reel a little tighter than they should have. "Yeah," he muttered, "I have always envied patient people." Jack grinned as he watched the light waves lazily lick the shore. Patience is an interesting thing. Sometimes you want to straightaway rush, break loose, make a scene, and then you pull yourself together and wait, because it tastes better this way. Ryan glanced at him briefly, but quickly turned away. "You speak like a maniac." "Or maybe I'm a maniac," Jack responded easily, slowly pulling out the fishing line. "Who knows, isn't it, I ever make a scene?" Ryan froze for a second. Then he grinned, trying to hide his growing concern. "No, you've always been damn collected. Not one of those who tear veins over trifles." Jack was silent, deliberately slowly transferring the fishing rod to his other hand. "It's not a small thing," he finally said, lazily glancing over Ryan's eyes. "I know." Ryan froze, but immediately pretended not to understand. What are you talking about, Jack? Well, for example, about your debts. Jack paused, as if enjoying the moment. Are things really that bad for you? Something dawned on me. About interest, about creditors, about threats. Ryan gripped the rod tighter, his fingers turning white. It's none of your business, he muttered. Perhaps, Jack nodded, slowly pulling out the line. But you know, there are things that cannot be hidden, especially if you know where to look. Ryan gave him a quick, intense look, but then turned away. Now his shoulders were tightly drawn together, and his jaw was trembling. The water gently splashed against the boat. Somewhere in the distance a crow cawed, but it seemed to Ryan that the whole world had suddenly froze. You know? What? His voice sounded too even, too cautious. Jack smiled, slowly, lazily, like a man who enjoys the game. Let's not pretend that you're a fool, he said quietly. You're a smart guy, Ryan. Ryan clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening on the rod. I don't understand what you're talking about. Is this true? Jack shook his head, looking up at the horizon. You know, there are moments when a person thinks that he has everything under control. He thinks that no one is behind him, and no one is following him. What is neat? Invisible. Ryan was silent, but his breathing was a little deeper now. The only problem is that if someone really wants to know the truth, they will find out. Jack paused, giving Ryan a chance to digest his words, give an opportunity to feel how the noose slowly tightens. Ryan swallowed. Are you hinting at something specific? Jack looked at him for a long moment and then smiled. I'm just speculating. About life. About trust. About how people make errors. Ryan nodded, but his hand shook slightly as he made another cast of line. Jack saw everything. He saw the panic growing inside Ryan, how he tried don't give himself away. It was the sweetest hunt, tremor hunting. And the most interesting thing is that he was just getting started. The evening turned out to be surprisingly cozy. The veranda smelled of fire smoke, freshly cooked fish soup, and alcohol. Jack sat at the head of the table, lazily sipping whiskey, while Ryan mechanically slurped hot broth, occasionally glancing at Lauren. Nikki was relaxed, her eyes sparkling as she listened to another story from Jack about his travels. Everything looked almost fine, but Lauren felt something's wrong. Laughter, conversations, a slightly drunken atmosphere. But Jack was different. He was too calm, too confident. He didn't look at her like before. There was no desire in his eyes. There was no hidden fire that flared up when she was nearby. Something has changed. When everyone had gone to their rooms, Lauren was left alone, sitting on the bed. Her heart was beating faster than usual. She shed her dress, leaving only her lace underwear, and slowly walked towards Jack's bedroom door. She took a deep breath and pushed it. Jack stood by the window, holding a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't even turn around when he heard her enter. Are you awake? Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. Jack took a sip, still not turning around. I think, his voice sounded calm, but too distant. Lauren frowned. She took a step closer, her bare feet sliding silently across the floor. About what? She gently touched his shoulder. And then he finally looked at her. His look was empty. For a second, Lauren felt a chill run down her spine. About us, he answered calmly. She blinked as if she couldn't believe her ears. Jack never said that. Never sounded so. He was always either passionate or cold, but not so. Indifferent. About us? She repeated, approaching. She ran her fingers along his forearm, trying to return the spark. Maybe I should remind you what it's like to be with you. She pressed herself against him. Her lips touched his neck. Her body pressed softly against his. But Jack didn't answer. He just stood there like a stone as her lips slid over his skin. What's wrong with you? Her voice broke. Nothing, Jack grinned, but there was no warmth in that smile. Lauren suddenly felt her fingers trembling. His coldness was wrong. This was no ordinary alienation. It was something. Others. She ran her palm down, trying to find his reaction, but Jack grabbed her wrist. Stronger than usual. No need, he said evenly. She froze. Why? Her voice was almost a whisper. Jack looked at her. His eyes were icy. Just don't, Lauren. She felt fear. For the first time ever, she felt fear next to him. He knew something. But what? Lauren was sleeping. Her breathing was even, her face relaxed, but Jack knew it was an illusion. There was no peace in her sleep. She felt that something was not so, but could not realize how much. Jack stood by the bed, watching her in the dim moonlight. A few seconds, and he left, silently closing the door behind him. He walked towards the room where Ryan and Nikki were. A quiet knock on the door. "Open it," he said calmly. After a couple of seconds, the door opened slightly and Ryan looked out, frowning. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, obviously not sleeping. "What do you want?" His voice was hoarse, irritated. "I need help," Jack answered calmly. "Something with a generator in the forest. It looks like the plugs were knocked out. We need to figure it out." Ryan snorted. "Maybe in the morning. It's 3 in the morning." Jack did not smile, did not show the slightest hint of impatience. He's just watched. "I think you'll want to help now." Ryan exhaled slowly and glanced quickly at Nikki, who was sleeping peacefully, curled up under the covers. She didn't even move, not suspecting that at that second her husband was being offered a deal on which his life depended. "To hell with you," Ryan muttered, pulling on his jacket. They went out, and a few minutes later they were walking along a narrow path leading deep into the forest. The moonlight made its way through the foliage, but the night seemed thick, heavy. Jack walked confidently. Ryan lagged behind slightly, looking back from time to time. "Where the hell is this generator?" he muttered, clearly annoyed. Jack stopped. Ryan took a couple more steps forward before realizing that something's wrong. He turned around. Jack stood in the middle of the path, arms crossed over his chest. There was no smile. "What the hell?" Ryan frowned. "Come on," without further ado. Jack said it so calmly that it made him scarier. "You already know why we are here." Ryan clenched his fists. "What the hell are you talking about?" Jack slowly walked closer, his voice smooth and icy. "About you." "Oh, Lauren, about how you had sex with my wife." The forest around suddenly became too quiet. Ryan froze. His chest heaved heavily, but his face did not tremble. "You're talking nonsense," he breathed, but his voice was too tense. "Is it true?" Jack tilted his head as if studying him. "So you want me to repeat it? The way you spread my wife's legs, in my house, in my bed, in my car. Do you want me to show you that you need proof?" Ryan swallowed. He understood this is the end. "Okay," he managed. "So what now?" Jack took another step. Now they were standing so close that Ryan could feel his breath. "You have two options." His voice was overly calm. "First, I end this here and now." Ryan didn't blink. Second, his voice was broken. Jack leaned closer. "You disappear. You disappear from the city, from her life, forever. I don't want to hear your name. I don't want to see your face. Rotten. If even one of your shadows falls next to her, you will beg me to choose the first option." Ryan swallowed. The forehead was covered with sweat, and the eyes panic rushed. He understood that Jack was not kidding. Jack grinned. "It feels like your ass is shrinking, right? Not used to being the one on the losing side, and I, bitch, have been waiting for this moment. I wanted to see you like this, pathetic, sweaty, trembling with fear." Ryan was silent, but his breathing became heavier. Jack saw him struggling with his thoughts, looking for a way out. But there was no way out. "Well, what the hell do you say?" Jack stepped closer, growling right in his face. "Are you ready to eat your shit, bastard?" Ryan closed his eyes, clenched his teeth, and then exhaled heavily. "Okay," he said quietly. Jack took a step back. "You have 24 hours. Get lost, Ryan." Ryan nodded slowly. Jack turned and walked back down the path. He knew that he would choose the right option. And if not, but Ryan not the kind of person who will just give up. "Do you think I'll just leave?" he growled, taking a step forward. Jack paused, feeling the tension rising. He didn't turn around, just tilted his head slightly, listening. Ryan was breathing too hard. Anger began to boil within him, but not fear, stupidity. "You're not in a position to swing your license," Jack said calmly. "You had a chance to leave." "Fuck you," Ryan growled. The sound of snow underfoot, a sharp push, he attacked. But Jack was ready. He quickly turned around and grabbed Ryan by the jacket, using his own weight against him. Everything happened too fast before Ryan realized what was happening. The knife blade had already entered under his ribs. A muffled groan escaped his throat. His eyes widened in shock. "Why you?" he breathed, staggering. Jack held the handle of the knife tightly. His face remained dispassionate. "You chose this yourself," he said quietly. Ryan jerked, trying to take a step back, but his legs gave way. He fell into the snow, leaving a dark, spreading trail behind him. His fingers clenched convulsively on the blade, but he couldn't fight anymore. Jack slowly dropped to one knee, looking into his face. "You thought you could outplay me?" His voice was even, almost sympathetic. "You're just a pawn. Always was. You're not a player, Ryan. You loser." Ryan wheezed, blood sprouting from his lips. He tried to say something, but the air no longer filled his lungs. Jack watched his eyes slowly extinguished. "In a few seconds, it's over." He straightened up, looked around the motionless body, and took a deep breath. Silence swallowed the forest again. But Jack couldn't leave any traces. He looked around not far away, behind the trees. The black surface of the river shone silver. He grabbed Ryan's body by the collar and began dragging him through the snow. A trail of blood stretched behind him, but would soon disappear. Fresh snow had covered everything up. When he reached the shore, Jack without hesitation leaned down and pushed the body forward. Ice water accepted, there was no sound, only light waves spread across the surface. Ryan disappeared underwater as if he had never existed. Jack watched the river slowly calm down. Time passed. Nobody knew. Nobody will guess. Jack walked slowly into the house, brushing snow off his boots. It was warm inside, the smell of coffee wafted through the kitchen, and Lauren was sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket. She lazily scrolled through her phone, not suspecting that her world has already changed. Nikki stood at the stove, stirring the omelet. Jack glanced at her quickly. She didn't even look worried. She didn't know. "Good morning," he said, walking to the coffee machine. Lauren looked at him with slight surprise. "Where have you been?" She stretched, clearly just waking up. Jack took a sip of coffee, paused, then sighed. Ryan left. Lauren frowned and put her phone down. "In terms of where?" "Don't know." He shrugged, putting the cup on the table. "I woke up early, went out onto the veranda, and he was already gone. No note, no messages. He just packed his things and disappeared." "What kind of nonsense?" Lauren straightened up sharply. "He wouldn't have left without saying goodbye." Nikki turned around, frowning. "This doesn't look like him. Are you sure?" Jack looked straight at her and nodded. "Sure." Lauren took out her phone, quickly opening her messages. Her fingers ran across the screen until she realized nothing. No calls, no missed calls, no messages. Ryan seemed to disappear. Maybe he just went home. Nikki muttered, but there was doubt in her voice. Lauren stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. "No, it doesn't look like him." She thought. Her gaze became worried. Jack watched her, keeping his face serenely calm. "Maybe he had a fight with someone," he said casually, turning to the window. "Maybe he just decided he didn't belong here." Lauren looked at him suspiciously, but didn't say anything. She tried to realize how strange it all looked like this. Jack slowly finished his coffee, turned to them, and smiled. "Don't worry." His voice was even, almost affectionate. "He's a grown boy. If something happens, it will show up." Nikki nodded, but her face remained tense. 2 days later. Lauren's phone vibrated on the table, but she didn't immediately notice. Her thoughts were racing, anxious anticipation pressing from within. Finally, she picked up the phone. "Hello?" Her voice trembled. A detective's voice was heard on the other end. "Mrs. Holt? This is Detective Hanley. We have news. Your husband has been found. He's dead." The blood drained from her face. In the chest, everything has shrunk. What? Her breathing hitched. Where? In the river. The detective paused. We need you to come for identification. The phone almost fell out of her hands. Ryan is dead. She felt like the world was collapsing. Nikki ran into the cafe, her face pale, her lips tightly compressed. She noticed Jack at the far table and, without hesitation, abruptly sat down opposite him. You did it, right? She hissed, clutching the tabletop. Jack calmly looked up at her. In them, there was no remorse or fear. What are you talking about? His voice was even. Don't pretend. Nikki clenched her fists. They found Ryan, dead, in the river, and you want to say that this is just a coincidence? He slowly put the cup of coffee aside and leaned closer. If you are so sure, why are you sitting here and not going to the police? His voice was quiet, almost hypnotic. Nikki held her breath, because she knew. She knew what to tell the police. She couldn't do anything. This is too much, Jack. Her voice trembled. We wanted to destroy them, but not kill them. Jack grinned. Do you really think that he would just leave like that? Ryan was a coward, but when a coward is cornered, he becomes dangerous. I gave him a choice. He chose. Damn! Nikki ran a hand over her face, shaking her head in shock. Lauren is going crazy. The police are already looking for clues. If they link it to you... Jack sat in his car, watching the entrance to the police station. Everything was boiling inside, but outside he remained impeccably calm. He always played the long game, always kept the situation under control, but now it's on him to start hunting. The investigation has officially begun. The police dug and asked questions. Lauren was rushing around in a panic. Nikki could break at any minute. She was too emotional, too scared. If you push her into a corner, she will give it up without even realizing it. He knew that to stay in the city was too risky. You need to disappear. Disappear right. But before that he had to apply the final blow. Lauren must remember him forever. He dialed her number. Jack? Her voice was hoarse, full of anxiety. He smiled, leaning forward. How are you, dear? Did you hear? Lauren's voice trembled. Ryan. They found him. The police. They questioned me. I don't know what to do, Jack. Of course I heard. His voice was too smooth. You know, I always keep my finger on the pulse. She fell silent. She felt something was wrong. I felt his game. You don't know anything about this, do you? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Jack grinned and licked his lips, enjoying this moment. He felt her fear through the telephone connection. What if I know? His voice was velvety, but with predatory notes. What? Her voice broke off in a breath. Tell me, Lauren, have you ever thought about what it would be like to be in complete darkness, when you don't know what will happen next, when every step you take is a step into the unknown? She was silent. She understood. What do you want? Her voice was almost a whisper. He smiled, looking in the rearview mirror. I want to watch you burn, darling. Lauren woke up to a loud knock on the door. Not yet realizing what was happening, she pulled on her robe and headed downstairs. Anxiety grew in her chest, as if her premonition was trying to warn of an impending storm. She opened the door and two policemen stood on the threshold. Miss Carter, Detective Hanley said coldly, holding the warrant in his hands. We need to inspect your house. Her heart sank. Oh, examine? Why? Her voice broke. New evidence has arrived in the Ryan Holt case. The detective answered without unnecessary emotion. Please, step aside and do not interfere with our work. Lauren was petrified. She has nothing to hide. Is it true? She nodded silently, retreating deeper into the corridor as the police entered and began to inspect the house. The knocking of boxes, the overturning of furniture, the whispering of employees, everything that was happening seemed unreal, as if she was watching someone else's life. But then she heard words that made her blood run cold. Here, the voice of one of the officers rang out. Lauren froze. The cup was shaking in her hand, but she didn't even notice how the hot coffee splashed onto her fingers. The policeman held in his hands the same knife. Her breathing hitched. She knew this knife. I used it every day in the kitchen. Is this yours? Hanley asked coldly, raising the blade so that it flashed under the light of the lamp. Why, yes, but... She swallowed, not understanding what was happening. It's just a kitchen knife. Interesting. The detective came closer, looking straight into her eyes. Because this knife was found with Ryan Walsh's blood. Lauren speechless. What? It's impossible. Her voice turned into a weak wheeze. It's very possible, Miss Holt, Hanley continued. According to witness testimony, this knife was in your country house. You took it with you for the weekend. And guess what? A blood test showed that it was murder weapon. Lauren couldn't breathe. It's a trap. Jack, this is his job. He took her knife, killed Ryan, and put him back, knowing the police would find him. It's not me. She breathed out, but her voice sounded as if she didn't believe it herself. Hanley sighed as he pulled out his handcuffs. Lauren Carter, you are under arrest for the murder of Ryan Holt. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. Lauren felt her world crumble around her. Her arms were twisted behind her back, the metal of the handcuffs cutting painfully into her skin. Her heart was pounding. He set her up. Somewhere outside the city, far from this scene, Jack was already driving away, disappearing into the darkness. And he smiled. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.